Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're not talking about a movie, but a death sentence disguised as entertainment. They wanted to make a movie about the devil, but the devil decided to direct their lives instead. On screen, the blood is fake, but the pain is real. Gregory Peck plays a father who loses his son, only to bury him in real life just before filming begins. Visual effects expert John Richardson designs the beheading scene for his character, only to witness the woman he loves die in a car accident on Friday the 13th. 3 airplanes are struck by lightning. A zoo becomes a slaughterhouse, and there are deaths not in the script. The Omen is more than just a movie, it's a warning. Beware of what you summon. But this horror didn't emerge from a vacuum. It was born into a timeline already drowning in darkness. By 1975, the American optimism of the summer of love had been strangled by the cold realities of Vietnam, Watergate, and the Manson murders. A cynical, weary nation no longer feared monsters in castles. They feared the evil lurking in their own homes and children. It was in this atmosphere of spiritual dread that Harvey Bernhard pitched a terrifying concept. The Antichrist not as a demon, but as an innocent child raised in political power. Though intended as a commercial thriller to capitalize on the success of films like The Exorcist, the project was shadowed by a chilling warning from the start. Bob Munger, who suggested the idea, told Bernhard, "The devil does not want his paternity suit exposed." The filmmakers laughed off the prophecy, but by the summer of 1975, the laughter died. Before the cameras could even roll, the darkness was already waiting to claim its first victim. The studio, 20th Century Fox, knew that for the movie to work, it couldn't be a B-grade horror flick. It needed gravity. It needed respectability. To make the audience believe in the devil, they needed an actor who represented absolute truth. They needed Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck was more than a movie star. He was an institution. He was Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. He was the voice of moral authority, the quintessential good man. He was tall, deep-voiced, and carried himself with a dignity that seemed unshakable. In the public imagination, if Gregory Peck said something was true, it was true. But behind the facade of the Hollywood legend, the real Gregory Peck was at a crossroads. By 1975, his career had stalled. He hadn't had a major box office hit in years. He was aging. The new Hollywood, the era of Scorsese, Coppola, and gritty realism, was taking over, and the polished stars of the golden age were beginning to look like relics. Peck needed a hit. He needed a role that would reintroduce him to a younger generation. When his agent sent him the script for The Omen, he was intrigued. It wasn't his usual fare. It was a horror film, a genre he had generally avoided. But the role of Robert Thorne, a diplomat, a father, a man of power, fit him like a glove. It was a psychological drama wrapped in supernatural clothing. He agreed to consider it. But while negotiations were underway, the first and most devastating blow of the curse was about to land. It would not strike on a film set. It would strike in the quiet privacy of his own home. Gregory Peck was a man who valued family above all else. He had 3 sons from his first marriage, Jonathan, Stephen, and Carrie. Jonathan Peck, the eldest, was 30 years old in 1975. He was a young man of immense promise. He had not ridden his father's coattails into acting. Instead, he had forged his own path in journalism. He was a television reporter for a local station in Santa Maria, California. He was bright, driven, and seemingly successful. To the outside world, he was the heir to the Peck legacy of hard work and integrity. But internal struggles are rarely visible on the evening news. In June 1975, the demons that Jonathan had been fighting in private won the war. The details are stark and painful. Jonathan had been suffering from a failing relationship and the deep, crushing pressure of depression. On a quiet summer day, alone in his home, Jonathan Peck took a gun and ended his own life. The news shattered Gregory Peck's world. The death of a child is a violation of the natural order. It is a pain that has no name. For Peck, the world simply stopped. The man who had played heroes capable of solving any problem was now faced with a reality he could not fix. Peck went into seclusion. The press was respectful, but the silence in the Peck household was deafening. He was a man hollowed out by grief. He spent days staring at walls, trying to comprehend a reality that no longer made sense. It was in this state of absolute emotional wreckage that he had to make a decision about the Omen. Most people assumed he would drop out. How could he not? The script was about a father tasked with killing his own child, a narrative that grotesquely mirrored his own loss. The parallels were cruel. Every page seemed to mock his pain, serving as a constant reminder of fatherhood and death. Yet against all expectations, Peck made a decision that stunned the studio. He stayed. Whether driven by financial necessity or a desperate desire to channel his screaming grief into the only outlet he had left, his work, he boarded the plane for London. Perhaps it was a need to confront the darkness head on. By playing Robert Thorne, a man destroyed by forces beyond his control, Peck could finally scream on camera in a way he never could in public. He signed the contract, he packed his bags for London. But as he prepared to leave, the curse shifted its focus from his heart to his physical safety. The production was scheduled to shoot in London, utilizing the gloomy, overcast atmosphere of the United Kingdom to set the tone. This required the key players to fly across the Atlantic from Los Angeles. In 1975, air travel was statistically safe, but it was still a marvel of engineering that relied on the cooperation of nature. For the cast and crew of The Omen, nature decided not to cooperate. Gregory Peck boarded a commercial flight to London. He was tired, likely sedated to manage his grief, and looking forward to the anonymity of a darkened cabin. The flight began normally, but as the plane climbed over the Atlantic, the weather turned violent. A massive storm system seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Passengers described the turbulence as terrifying, the kind that rattles the teeth and sends luggage flying. Then there was a flash of blinding white light and a deafening crack. Lightning struck the plane. It wasn't a glancing blow. The bolt hit the wing, scorching the metal and reportedly taking out one of the engines. The aircraft convulsed. For a few agonizing minutes, it seemed like the plane might go down. The smell of ozone and fear filled the cabin. They managed to land safely. Peck, shaken but alive, disembarked. He likely told himself it was just a freak accident, a 1-in-a-million occurrence. 3 days later, Mace Neufeld, the film's executive producer, the man responsible for the logistics and money behind the project, boarded his own flight from Los Angeles to London. The sky was waiting for him. Like a replay of a nightmare, Neufeld's plane encountered a severe storm, and once again, lightning struck. This time, it was an even closer call. The systems on the plane were momentarily disrupted. Neufeld later recalled the sheer terror of that moment, the feeling that something was specifically targeting them. It was the roughest 5 minutes I've ever had on an airliner, Neufeld said. 2 key figures, 2 different flights, 2 lightning strikes. Lightning happens, but twice in 3 days to the same production team? That begins to look like a pattern. Yet the sky wasn't finished. In a chilling final twist, David Seltzer, the screenwriter, the man who had typed the words that summoned the devil onto the page, was also traveling on a commercial flight. And just like the others, his plane was reportedly struck by lightning. 1 is an accident, 2 is a coincidence, but 3 strikes against the creators of the Omen? The cast and crew began to realize these were not mere weather anomalies, they were warnings. If the lightning strikes were warnings, the next event was a near-miss execution. During the chaotic weeks of pre-production and early shooting, logistics were a nightmare. Gregory Peck needed to travel to Israel for a brief period. To facilitate this, a private charter plane was arranged. It was a small aircraft intended to ferry Peck and a few associates. The flight plan was filed. The pilot was ready. The seats were booked. At the very last minute, Peck canceled. The reasons for the cancellation vary in the telling. Some say he was too exhausted. Others say the studio needed him for a costume fitting. Whatever the mundane reason, the decision was made. He would not get on that plane. The plane took off without him, reportedly carrying a group of Japanese businessmen instead. According to accounts from the time, the aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff, leaving no survivors. If Peck had not canceled his flight at the last minute, the curse would have claimed its leading man before filming even began. The curse had missed him by inches, but in missing him, it had consumed an entire family. This tragedy reinforced a dark feeling that began to permeate the set. The curse wasn't just targeting them, it was targeting anyone near them. It was collateral damage. It was a contagion. By the time the cast and crew assembled in London, the mood was already heavy. The news of the lightning strikes and the plane crash had circulated. The crew, usually a cynical bunch of technicians and laborers, began to wear Lucky Charms. They began to whisper. The weather in London matched the mood. It was gray, wet, and relentlessly gloomy. The director, Richard Donner, was a man of energy and skepticism. He tried to keep the mood light. He shouted, he joked, he pushed the pace. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in budgets and schedules. But even Donner couldn't ignore the strange tension that hung over the production. Filming began, and immediately the script began to bleed into reality. There is a scene in the movie where Robert Thorne and his wife Catherine take Damien to a church. As they approach the holy ground, the child begins to panic. He screams, he claws at his mother, he attacks her. It is a scene of chaotic violence, contrasting the innocence of a child with the rejection of the divine. To film this, they needed to provoke a reaction, but on set, the tension was real. Lee Remick, a consummate professional, found herself constantly on edge. The bruises she sustained in the car scenes were real. The fear in her eyes wasn't just acting, it was a reaction to the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to squeeze the air out of the sound stage. Gregory Peck, meanwhile, was a ghost. Crew members recall that he was kind, polite, and professional. He knew everyone's name, but the moment the camera stopped rolling, the light went out of his eyes. He would retreat into himself. He was channeling his grief into Robert Thorne, but the vessel was cracking. In the film, Robert Thorne slowly comes to the realization that his son is a monster. He resists it. He denies it. He fights it. This mirrored Peck's own internal battle. He was fighting the reality of his son's suicide. He was fighting the what ifs. What if I had been there? What if I had called him that day? Every line of dialogue about saving the child or stopping the evil served as a brutal reminder of the son he couldn't save. As the weeks went on, the accidents moved from the skies to the ground. They became smaller, more personal, and more malicious. Props would disappear or break without explanation. Lights would burst. Cameras would jam at critical moments only to work perfectly when tested by technicians. But the most disturbing phenomenon was the feeling of being watched. Several crew members reported a sensation of uneasiness when working on the set of the Thorne residence. It wasn't a classic haunting, no rattling chains or moaning ghosts. It was a pressure, a feeling of hostility, as if the space itself rejected them. But the darkness did not stop at inanimate objects. Soon it would turn its attention to the living creatures on set. The script called for nature to protect the Antichrist, but in reality, nature seemed to be declaring war on the production. The incident at Windsor Safari Park was supposed to be a controlled chaos. The script called for the baboons to attack the car, reacting to the presence of the Antichrist. The director, Richard Donner, wanted realism. He got more than he bargained for. The primates didn't just act agitated. They launched a coordinated assault. They tore at the wipers, hammered on the roof, and screamed with a primal hatred that unnerved even the veteran animal handlers. Lee Remick, trapped inside the vehicle, was terrified. The fear you see in the final cut of the film is not performance art. It is the genuine reaction of a woman who believes the glass is about to shatter. But the true horror didn't happen while the cameras were rolling. It happened in the quiet aftermath, when the crew had packed up and left the park. The following day, a park warden, a man who had assisted the film crew, ensuring their safety around the wild animals, was performing his routine duties in the big cat enclosure. He knew the animals, and they knew him. It was a routine he had performed hundreds of times, but this time, something was wrong. Without warning, the tigers turned on him. It wasn't a playful swipe, it was a predatory kill. They seized him by the head and neck. Death was instantaneous. When the news reached the production office, a cold silence descended. The crew tried to rationalize it. They are wild animals, they said. These things happen. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The attack occurred shortly after the production of The Omen had wrapped at that location. It felt as though the dark energy they had summoned for the scene had lingered in the air, infecting the animals and turning them against their masters. The mark of the beast had been left behind at Windsor, and the warden paid the price. The uneasiness with animals followed the production back to the studio. In the script, Damien is protected by a large Rottweiler. The dog is his sentinel, a physical manifestation of the devil's protection. For the film, the production hired top-tier stunt dogs. These were animals trained to simulate aggression without inflicting harm. They were supposed to grab a padded sleeve, growl on cue, and release instantly. But on the set of The Omen, the dogs seemed to forget their training. During the filming of the cemetery scene, one of the most intense sequences in the movie, where Gregory Peck is attacked by the guardian dog, the stuntman, Terry Walsh, took the place of the lead actor. Walsh was a professional. He was wearing protective gear under his costume. He had done this 100 times, but the dog didn't go for the patting. In a moment of terrifying unpredictability, the Rottweiler bypassed the protected arm and lunged for Walsh's vital areas. It bit through the costume, sinking its teeth into flesh. The attack was frenzied. It took the frantic efforts of the handlers to pull the animal off. Walsh was injured, but he survived. Yet the psychological damage to the crew was severe. The animals were not behaving like trained performers. They were behaving like possessed creatures. They were reacting to something invisible. It reinforced the growing paranoia that the devil in the script was not just a character on a page, but a presence in the room. While nature seemed to be rebelling against the production, the human world was equally volatile. The year 1975 was the height of the Troubles, the violent conflict involving the Provisional Irish Republican Army, IRA. London was a city under siege. Bombings were a constant threat. But for the cast and crew of the Omen, the violence seemed to track their movements with suspicious precision. The film's producer, Mace Neufeld, the man who had already survived a lightning strike on his plane, was staying at the Hilton Hotel in London. It was a luxury establishment, a fortress of comfort. During his stay, the IRA targeted the hotel. A bomb detonated. The blast shattered windows and destroyed the lobby. Neufeld and his wife were in the building at the time. They survived, shaken but physically unharmed. But the message was clear. Nowhere was safe. The sanctuary of the hotel had been breached. Then came the incident at the restaurant. It was a cold evening in November. A group of the film's key personnel, including director Richard Donner and several executives, had planned a dinner at a famous establishment in Mayfair called Scott's Restaurant. It was a popular spot for the London elite. They had a reservation. They were dressed and ready to go. But fate intervened. A car didn't arrive on time. A meeting ran long. A misplaced set of keys. The specific reason is lost to history, but the result was that the group was delayed. They were running 15 minutes late. As they were preparing to leave for the restaurant, a sound tore through the London air. A dull, heavy thud that rattled the windows miles away. The IRA had bombed Scott's Restaurant. The explosion tore through the front of the building. It killed one person and injured 15 others. The blast destroyed the very table where the Omen crew had been scheduled to sit. If they had been on time, if they had been punctual professionals, they would have been dead. They stood in the street, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance, realizing that they had just cheated death again. First the lightning, then the plane crash, now the bomb. It felt as if they were walking through a minefield. The curse was not just a series of spooky coincidences. It was a relentless pursuit. Death was hunting them, missing by inches again and again. Among the crew, one man took particular pride in the film's horrors. His name was John Richardson. Richardson was the special effects supervisor. In the era before computer-generated imagery, CGI, he was an artist of the physical. He built the mechanics of death. He was the man responsible for making the impossible look real. For the Omen, Richardson was tasked with creating one of the most shocking death scenes in cinema history: the decapitation of the photographer, Keith Jennings. The script called for a sheet of plate glass to slide off a truck, slicing through the character's neck. It had to be sudden, clinical, and absolute. Richardson approached the task with the precision of an engineer. He calculated the speed of the glass. He built a mannequin that could be severed realistically. He designed the mechanism to launch the glass at the exact right angle. When they filmed the scene, it worked perfectly. The head spun in the air. The body fell. It was grotesque, but it was a triumph of special effects. Richardson was proud. He had designed the perfect accident. He had created a masterpiece of violence. He did not know it then, but he was rehearsing for his own nightmare. The production wrapped, the film was edited, scored, and released in June 1976. It was a massive success. The world was terrified by Damien. The box office numbers were huge. The crew dispersed, believing they had escaped the shadow of the Antichrist. But for special effects, wizard John Richardson, the horror he had engineered for the screen, was patiently waiting to manifest in his reality. He moved to the Netherlands for his next project, A Bridge Too Far, bringing along his assistant and partner Liz Moore, unaware that the script for their lives had one final gruesome scene left to play. August 1976. 2 months after The Omen hit theaters, Richardson and Moore were driving through the Dutch countryside. It was a Friday the 13th. The weather was bad. Rain slickened the roads. Richardson was driving his BMW, perhaps with the confidence of a man who had mastered the mechanics of danger on screen. But as they approached a town, tragedy struck. Whether it was a tire burst or a skid, the outcome was a scene of devastation. Richardson's car lost control and careened into an oncoming vehicle. The impact was catastrophic. The chassis of the oncoming vehicle sheared through the passenger side of the BMW with merciless force. Liz Moore suffered massive fatal injuries, while Hollywood legend later claimed the scene perfectly mirrored the decapitation Richardson had designed for the film. The reality was just as devastating without the need for embellishment. Richardson, dazed and trapped in the wreckage, turned to look at the woman he loved. The special effects wizard, who had simulated death for a living, was now sitting amidst the very real, unscripted wreckage of his own life. There were no retakes. There was no fake blood, but the horror was not over. As Richardson stumbled away from the burning car, his eyes fell upon a road sign pointing to the Dutch town of Omen, a name just one letter away from Omen. But the detail that haunted him for years was the distance marker. He later claimed that as he looked up, the sign read exactly 66.6 kilometers. While skeptics argue the number might have been rounded up, for Richardson, staring through the shattered glass, it felt like a signature. The devil had waited until the movie was over. He had waited until they felt safe. And then he had reached out and signed his name in blood and metal on a lonely road in Holland. Richardson survived the crash, but the psychological wound never closed. He continued to work in film, contributing to major franchises like Aliens and Harry Potter. But those who knew him whispered that a part of him had died that day. He carried the weight of a survivor in a war where the enemy was invisible, the man who looked into the abyss, designed a face for it, and then watched as it took the person standing next to him. While the physical curse manifested in planes, lightning, and car crashes, there was another dimension to the Omen that carried a spiritual weight: the sound. The director, Richard Donner, knew that the film needed a voice, not the voice of a character, but the voice of the devil himself. He turned to the legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith. Goldsmith was a genius, but for The Omen he had to go to a place few musicians dared to tread. He decided to write a black mass. In the Catholic tradition, the Mass is a celebration of Christ. Goldsmith inverted it. He took the Latin phrases and twisted them. Ave Maria, Hail Mary, became Ave Satani, Hail Satan. Corpus Christi, body of Christ, became Corpus Satani, body of Satan. He assembled a choir in London. These were professional singers, men and women who sang hymns in cathedrals on Sundays. Now they were being asked to stand in a recording booth and chant praises to the Prince of Darkness. There are stories from that recording session, stories of unease, stories of singers feeling physically ill as the words left their mouths. The chant, Sanguis bibimus corpus edimus, we drink the blood, we eat the body, was primal. It wasn't just music, it was a ritual. Goldsmith won an Oscar for the score. It is the only time in Academy Award history that a satanic anthem has been honored with the highest prize in cinema. But the irony is bitter. The music that brought Goldsmith his greatest acclaim was the soundtrack to the deaths of real people. Every time Ave Satani plays, that low, guttural chanting that rises to a scream, it serves as a requiem for the pilot's family, for the tiger handler, and for Liz Moore. It is a beautiful, terrifying piece of art that feels genuinely cursed. To listen to it is to invite the same cold wind that blew through the set in 1975. The story of the Omen did not end with the credits of the first film. The darkness seemed to possess a momentum of its own, reaching out to touch those who even considered stepping into its world. William Holden had wisely refused the first film, wanting no part of the devil. Yet 3 years later, he was tempted back for the sequel. It was a fatal change of heart. Holden finished the film, but the darkness was patient. In November 1981, a few years after the sequel's release, William Holden was found dead in his apartment in Santa Monica. He was alone in his apartment when he slipped on a rug, striking his head on a bedside table. The wound was severe, but not immediately fatal. The tragedy lies in the silence that followed. Holden did not call for help. Whether due to intoxication or pride, he remained there, bleeding to death amidst the quiet luxury of his fame. His body wasn't discovered for 4 days, a solitary, undignified end for the man who had once tried to refuse the darkness. It was as if the Omen energy, having missed him the first time, had finally circled back to collect its due. But while Holden's death was a lonely echo of the curse, the true heart of this tragedy always returns to the man who stood at its center, Gregory Peck. He was the anchor. He was the father. After the film wrapped, Peck continued his career. He did The Boys from Brazil. He did The Seawolves. He remained the dignified statesman of Hollywood. But those close to him saw the change. The suicide of his son Jonathan in 1975 had carved a hollow space in his chest that no amount of applause could fill. When he watched The Omen in later years, he wasn't watching a horror movie. He was watching a home movie of his own grief. The scene where he stands over the grave of his child, that wasn't acting. That was Gregory Peck saying goodbye to Jonathan. The scene where he screams in frustration at a world that makes no sense, that was a father raging against the unfairness of suicide. The curse of the Omen is often sensationalized with lightning and tigers, but the true curse was the one Gregory Peck carried in his heart, the curse of survival. He had to live. He had to keep working. He had to smile on talk shows. He had to accept the Oscar nomination. He had to be Gregory Peck for the world, while inside he was just a father who missed his boy. In the end, the most terrifying thing about the Omen isn't the Antichrist. It is the fragility of human life. It is the realization that you can be the most powerful, respected, and wealthy man in the world, and you still cannot stop a bullet, a lightning bolt, or a depression. Gregory Peck, John Richardson, and the crew of The Omen paid a heavy price for our entertainment. They walked through the fire so we could watch it from the safety of our living rooms. Coincidence or curse, the price was paid. When the credits roll and the final notes of Ave Satani fade, the question isn't whether the curse was real. The question is, was it worth it? The file on The Omen is finally closed, but Hollywood's shadows are deep and full of other tragedies waiting to be told. Is there another cursed production or a fallen icon whose story demands to be heard? Leave their name in the comments below. If you wish to continue this journey into the dark history of cinema, simply like this video and subscribe. It is the only way to ensure you don't miss what we summon next.